A girl enters a hospital on Christmas Eve with twins in her arms, and when she reveals who the twins are, everyone starts to cry. The Christmas Eve silence draped over the hospital like a freshly fallen blanket of snow. Green and gold garlands adorned the hallways, and twinkling lights softly blinked, contrasting with the usual serious atmosphere. At the nursing station in the emergency room, Claire adjusted her badge, her 62 years weighing heavily on her shoulders after hours of the night shift. Her tired eyes scanned the clock on the wall, 11:45 p.m., 15 minutes to midnight, 15 minutes to Christmas. Claire sighed, wondering how many more Christmases she would spend alone, far from the family she never had the chance to form. The sudden sound of the automatic doors swinging open violently snapped her out of her thoughts. Claire turned, expecting to see another festive drunk or a holiday domestic accident, but what she saw stopped her heart. Our girl, no more than 10 years old, stumbled through the entrance. Her brown hair was disheveled, her face pale and streaked with tears. But it wasn't this that made Claire freeze in her tracks. In the girl's arms, precariously wrapped in thin blankets, were two newborn babies. "Please," the girl begged, her voice hoarse and desperate. "Please, help them." Claire was the first to react, rushing towards the girl. "Sweetheart, what happened? Who are you?" The girl shook her head frantically, clutching the babies to her chest. I can't say. Just help them. Please." Dr. Marcus, the doctor on duty, approached quickly. "We need to examine the babies," he said, extending his arms. "No," the girl screamed, backing away. "I won't leave them. I promise to take care of them." Claire felt something strange stir within her, an inexplicable connection to this frightened child. Slowly, she knelt down, bringing herself to eye level with the girl. "What's your name, sweetheart?" The girl hesitated, her familiar blue eyes meeting Claire's. "Sophie," she whispered. "Sophie," Claire repeated softly. "My name is Claire. I know you're scared, but we need to check on the babies. They're very quiet, and that worries us. Can I take a little peek at them?" Sophie bit her lip, fresh tears welling up. Slowly, she loosened her grip. Claire gently pulled back the blanket. Two tiny faces appeared, pale and motionless. Panic rose in Claire's throat. "Dr. Marcus, we need to get them to the pediatric emergency room now." Everything became a whirlwind of activity. The babies were gently taken from Sophie's arms, who screamed in protest. Claire held her tightly, whispering words of comfort as the medical team rushed with the twins. "No, my brothers, you promised," Sophie screamed, struggling in Claire's arms. "Brothers?" Claire gasped, the revelation hitting her like a punch. Sophie froze, realizing her slip. Her eyes widened in fear. "It's okay," Claire assured quickly. "No one is going to hurt them or separate them. But we need to know what happened to help them better." Sophie crumbled, violent sobs shaking her small body. Claire held her tightly, feeling a surge of protectiveness she hadn't experienced in decades. Shh, it's all right now," she murmured, rocking the girl. "You were very brave bringing them here. Now let us help, okay?" Sophie nodded against Claire's chest, too exhausted to resist. As the nurse guided the girl to a nearby room, her mind was spinning. What terrible circumstances could have led a child to enter a hospital alone on Christmas Eve, carrying two newborns? Where were the parents? What was Sophie hiding? Claire looked at Sophie's sleeping face and felt that strange connection again. Something about this girl touched her deeply, awakening long-buried memories. Outside, the clock struck midnight. It was Christmas. And in that silent night, Claire knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Sitting beside Sophie's bed, holding her small, cold hand, Claire made a silent promise. She would uncover the truth behind this mysterious arrival, and come what may, she would protect this girl and her brothers. Christmas had brought an unexpected miracle to the hospital, but it also brought a mystery that threatened to unearth long-hidden secrets and change lives forever. The steady beep of heart monitors filled the air in the neonatal unit. Claire watched intently through the glass as Dr. Marcus and his team examined the twins. Her heart ached at the sight of the tiny bodies, so fragile and vulnerable, connected to tubes and wires. "How are they?" Claire asked as soon as Dr. Marcus exited the examination room. He sighed, rubbing his tired eyes. Dehydrated, but stable. It's a miracle, considering, well, whatever happened. They can't be more than a week old. Claire felt a chill run down her spine. A week? And that girl brought them here alone? The doctor nodded gravely. That's why I called the police. This whole situation, Akash, something is very wrong here. As if summoned by the mention, 2 police officers appeared in the hallway, their serious faces contrasting with the festive decorations around them. The girl, one of them asked. In room 105, Claire replied. But she's in shock. Maybe it's better to wait. The older officer raised a hand, interrupting her. We understand your concern, ma'am, but we need answers. Claire followed them to the room, her stomach churning with apprehension. Sophie was sitting on the bed, her knees pulled to her chest, her eyes glazed and fixed on the opposite wall. Sophie, Claire called softly, approaching her. There are some people here who need to ask a few questions. Is that okay? Sophie's eyes slowly turned to the police officers, and Claire saw the panic growing in them. No, Sophie cried, jumping off the bed and hiding behind Claire. I won't let you take my brothers. The younger officer knelt down, trying to appear less threatening. No one is going to take your brothers, sweetheart. We just want to understand what happened so we can help. Sophie shook her head furiously, clinging to Claire's blouse. I can't tell. I promised. Claire turned, embracing the trembling girl. Sophie, I know you're scared, but these men just want to help. If we don't know what happened, we can't protect you and your brothers properly. For a moment, it seemed like Sophie might give in. Her lips trembled, fresh tears shining in her eyes. But then she closed her expression, determination hardening her young features. I can't, she repeated. Please don't make me tell. The officers exchanged frustrated looks. The older one sighed, pulling Claire aside. Ma'am, if she doesn't cooperate, we'll have to take her to the station. It's standard procedure in abandonment cases. Abandonment, Claire exclaimed, indignant. She brought the babies to receive care. After a week alone with them, the officer replied dryly. Look, we don't like this any more than you do. But without information, our hands are tied. Claire looked back at Sophie, who was watching the conversation with wide, fearful eyes. Something inside her rebelled against the idea of seeing this frightened child taken away by the police on Christmas night. Give me until tomorrow, she pleaded impulsively. Let me stay with her tonight. Maybe I can get her to open up. The officers hesitated but finally agreed. As they left, Claire felt the weight of the responsibility she had just taken on. The hours dragged on. Claire tried everything. Casual conversations, funny hospital stories, even soft lullabies. But Sophie remained silent, responding only with nods or monosyllables. Near midnight, exhausted, Claire leaned back in the chair beside the bed. Her eyes wandered to the window, where snowflakes danced under the streetlights. The sight triggered a long-buried memory. It was Christmas Eve, 1978. Claire, then 16, looked out the hospital window, silent tears streaming down her face. In her arms, a small bundle stirred softly. Aren't you sure about this, dear? Her mother asked for the 1,000th time. We could still find a way, see? Claire shook her head, her heart broken but resolute. I can't give her the life she deserves, Mom. She deserves parents who can properly care for her. With trembling hands, she handed the baby to the social worker. The woman smiled gently. Aren't you doing the right thing? She will have a wonderful life, I promise. As she watched her newborn daughter being taken away, Claire made a silent vow. One day, somehow, she would make up for this moment. Claire. Sophie's soft voice brought her back to the present. The girl looked at her curiously. You're crying, Sophie said quietly. Claire touched her face, surprised to feel the moisture. Oh, I was just remembering something. Sophie hesitated, then asked, Was it something sad? Claire smiled sadly. Yes and no. Sometimes, the saddest things in our lives are also the ones that teach us the most. A comfortable silence fell over them. Then, to Claire's surprise, Sophie spoke again. My mum used to say something like that, she murmured. Claire's heart raced. This was the first time Sophie had mentioned her family voluntarily. "Your mum sounds like she was a very wise woman," Claire replied carefully. Sophie nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "She was... I miss her so much." At that moment, something broke. Sophie began to sob, years of repressed pain pouring out all at once. Claire pulled her into a tight embrace, rocking her gently. "Shh, it's all right. You're safe now," she whispered. Between sobs, fragments of Sophie's story began to emerge. A loving mother, an absent father, an unexpected pregnancy. And then, "She died," Sophie whispered, "giving birth to the twins. And Dad, he couldn't even look at them, so You took care of them," Claire completed softly. "Oh, Sophie, you were so brave." Sophie looked up, her eyes filled with fear and hope. You won't separate us, will you?" "I promised her I would take care of them. I promised." Claire felt her heart break and mend in an instant. At that moment, she knew she would do anything to keep that promise. "No, dear," she replied, her voice firm with newfound determination. "I won't let anyone separate you. We're in this together now." As the first light of Christmas morning began to filter through the window, Claire knew her life had changed forever. The mystery behind Sophie's arrival was far from solved, but one thing was certain. She would not rest until she ensured these children had the future they deserved. And perhaps, just perhaps, she would finally have the chance to fulfill the promise she had made so many years ago on another Christmas night. Christmas morning arrived with an eerie calm. The hospital, usually a whirlwind of activity, was strangely quiet. In room 105, Claire woke from a restless sleep, her neck sore from the uncomfortable position in the chair. Her eyes immediately sought Sophie, who was curled up on the hospital bed, her face still marked by the tears of the previous night. As Claire stretched, trying to relieve the stiffness in her muscles, Sophie began to stir. Her eyes opened slowly, disoriented for a moment before focusing on Claire. A flash of recognition, followed by a wave of complex emotions, passed over the girl's face. "Merry Christmas, Sophie," Claire said softly. "How are you feeling today?" Sophie sat up, pulling her knees to her chest. "Christmas," she murmured. I almost forgot." Claire moved closer, sitting on the edge of the bed. "How are you feeling today?" Sophie was silent for a long moment, her fingers nervously playing with the edge of the blanket. When she finally spoke, her voice was almost a whisper. "Are they okay, my brothers?" Claire smiled gently. "Yes, dear, they're stable. The doctors are taking very good care of them." The relief on Sophie's face was palpable. She let out a shaky breath, as if she had been holding it since she arrived at the hospital. "Sophie," Claire began cautiously, "I know it's hard, but we need to know more about what happened. To be able to help you and your brothers the best way possible." For a moment, it seemed like Sophie might shut down again, but then something in her eyes changed. It was as if a decision had been made. "Okay," she said softly, "I'll tell you, but you promise you'll stay with me?" Claire's heart ached. "Of course, dear. I'm here with you." Sophie took a deep breath and began her story. "My mom, she was pregnant. Dad wasn't happy when he found out. He drank a lot, you know? He got angry. Mom said he was scared, that things would get better when the babies were born." Claire listened attentively, her heart heavy with each word. "Last week, Mom started feeling pain. Dad had gone out to drink again. I tried to call an ambulance, but Mom said there was no time." Tears began to fall. "She made me promise to take care of the babies, no matter what happened. And then she..." Sophie couldn't finish the sentence, sobs shaking her small body. Claire pulled her into a tight embrace, her own silent tears falling. "Oh, Sophie," she whispered, "you were so brave, so brave." When Sophie calmed down a bit, she continued, "Dad came back and found Mom. He screamed a lot, broke things, and then he left again. He never came back." Claire felt a wave of anger against this man who had abandoned his children in such a terrible moment. But she kept her voice calm, encouraging Sophie to continue. "I tried to take care of the twins the best I could. I used the milk we had at home, tried to keep them clean and warm, but yesterday, they started getting very quiet. I got scared, So I took the money Mom saved for emergencies and came here." When Sophie finished her story, the silence in the room was deafening. Claire was stunned by the courage and resilience of this little girl who had faced so much. "Sophie," she said finally, her voice choked with emotion, "you saved your brothers' lives. You are a true hero." Sophie looked at Claire, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Do you think Mom would be proud?" "Oh dear," Claire replied, pulling Sophie into another embrace. "I'm sure she is incredibly proud of you." At that moment, Claire knew she needed to share the full story with the medical team and the police. With Sophie's consent, she called an emergency meeting. The conference room was packed. Doctors, nurses, social workers, and the 2 police officers from the previous night listened in stunned silence as Claire recounted Sophie's story. The girl sat beside her, holding her hand tightly. When Claire finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Dr. Marcus was the first to speak, his voice hoarse with emotion. "It's a miracle these children have survived. Sophie, you did an amazing job taking care of your brothers." The older police officer, who the night before had seemed so intimidating, now had tears streaming down his bearded face. "Girl, you're braver than many adults I know." The social worker, a middle-aged woman named Sarah, approached Sophie. "Taya, sweetheart, we're going to do everything we can to keep you and your brothers together. You're not alone in this." Sophie looked around the room, seeming overwhelmed by the sudden support. Her eyes turned to Claire, seeking reassurance and comfort. It was at this moment that Claire made a decision. Something about Sophie, about this whole situation, resonated deeply with her. Perhaps it was time to share her own story. "Sophie," she began softly, "there's something I want to tell you. Something that happened to me a long time ago, on another Christmas." The room fell silent, all eyes turning to Claire. "When I was 16, I got pregnant," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "I was too young, too scared to be a mother, so I made the hardest decision of my life. I gave my daughter up for adoption." Sophie looked at Claire with wide eyes, a new understanding dawning on her face. "I never knew what happened to her," Claire continued, "but every day since then I've thought about her, hoping she was safe, loved, and now seeing you, the courage you had to protect your brothers, well, I'd like to think my daughter would have been just as incredible as you." As Sophie looked at Claire with awe, she suddenly stood up and hugged her tightly. "She would have been," Sophie whispered, "because you are incredible too." In that moment, in a room full of strangers united by a story of loss, courage and love, something changed. A connection was formed, a silent promise made. As the sun of Christmas Day shone through the hospital windows, illuminating the tear-streaked faces in the room, it became clear that this was not just Sophie's story and her brothers. It was the beginning of something bigger, something that would change many lives in the days and weeks to come. The truth had come to light, painful and raw, but with it came hope. The hope of a new beginning, of a family rebuilt from the ashes of tragedy. And at the center of it all were Claire and Sophie, 2 souls united by fate and the courage to face the unknown together. News of Sophie's brave story spread through the hospital like wildfire. Nurses, doctors, and even patients whispered about the brave little girl who had saved her newborn brothers. The Christmas spirit, which had previously hung timidly in the decorated hallways, now took on a new dimension of meaning. Claire, exhausted but determined, informed the supervision that she would stay beyond her shift. "These children need me," she explained, her voice leaving no room for argument. The supervisor, with tears in her eyes after hearing a brief summary of the situation, simply nodded in agreement. Meanwhile, in the neonatal unit, Sophie sat between her brothers' incubators. Her eyes moved from one to the other, as if afraid they might disappear if she blinked. "They're so small," she murmured as Claire approached. At home, they seemed bigger. Claire smiled gently, placing a reassuring hand on Sophie's shoulder. "Babies always seem smaller in hospitals. But don't worry, they're getting the best care possible here." Sophie nodded, but Claire could see the worry still etched on her young face. "And if they don't like me when they grow up, if I'm not a good sister?" Claire's heart ached at the vulnerability in Sophie's voice. "Oh dear," she said, kneeling to be at eye level with the girl. "They will love you more than anything in the world. You're already the best sister they could ask for." Tears silently streamed down Sophie's face, and Claire pulled her into a tight hug. It was at this moment that Dr. Marcus entered, carrying 2 teddy bears. "Sorry to interrupt," he said with a warm smile, "but I thought our little warriors might like some company." Sophie looked at the teddy bears with a mix of surprise and gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, carefully taking the toys and placing one next to each incubator. The doctor's gesture seemed to open the floodgates. Throughout the day, a steady stream of hospital staff and community members arrived, bringing gifts, supplies, and words of support. A nurse brought baby clothes that her own children had worn. A group of hospital volunteers organized a quick collection of diapers and formula. A local family, and upon hearing the story, appeared with a double stroller. Claire watched in awe as the room filled with presents, and Sophie's expression gradually shifted from fear to hope. "See, Sophie," Claire said softly, "all these people want to help. You're not alone in this." Sophie looked around, her eyes wide with wonder. I didn't know there were so many good people in the world," she murmured. As the day wore on, Sophie began to open up more, sharing details of the anxious week she had spent caring for the twins. "I tried giving them a bottle every 3 hours, like Mom had taught me," she explained. "But sometimes they cried so much, I didn't know what to do." Claire listened attentively, her heart breaking with each new detail. Sophie told how she improvised diapers with towels when the disposables ran out, how she sang endless lullabies on nights when the babies wouldn't stop crying, how she prayed for her father to return and help. "You did an incredible job, Sophie," Claire assured. Many adults would have panicked in the same situation. Sophie gave a small smile, the first Claire had seen since her arrival. I just wanted to make Mom proud." "Oh dear," Claire replied, her voice choked with emotion. "I'm sure she is." As they talked, Claire felt a special bond forming between them. There was something in Sophie, a mix of strength and vulnerability, that touched her deeply. Perhaps it was the echo of her own youth, or perhaps it was simply fate intervening. Claire began to share her own stories, of her youth, of her years as a nurse, of the patients who had touched her over the years. Sophie listened with rapt attention, her eyes shining with a curiosity that belied her years. It was during one of these conversations that Anne, the social worker, and Claire's old friend, arrived. Her usually serious face was softened by an expression of compassion. "Claire," she greeted with a nod. Her eyes turned to Sophie. "You must be the young hero everyone is talking about." Sophie blushed, partially hiding behind Claire. Anne knelt down, bringing herself to eye level with Sophie. "Don't worry, dear. I'm here to help. My job is to make sure you and your little brothers are safe and well cared for." Claire could feel the tension in Sophie's body. "It's okay," she whispered to the girl. "Anne is my friend. We can trust her." Slowly, Sophie emerged from behind Claire, looking at Anne with a mix of caution and hope. "If you're okay with it, Sophie," Anne continued gently, "I'd like to ask you a few more questions about your family. We need to understand your situation completely. Can you do that?" Sophie looked at Claire, seeking reassurance. With an encouraging nod from Claire, she began to speak. Anne listened attentively, making occasional notes, but mostly offering supportive smiles and words of encouragement. When Sophie finished, Anne took a deep breath. "Thank you for sharing that with me, Sophie. You're a very brave girl." Turning to Claire, Anne said in a low voice, "We need to talk about the next steps. The situation is complicated." Claire nodded, feeling a knot form in her stomach. She knew that despite all the goodwill and support, the path ahead would be difficult. Legal issues, custody, the whereabouts of Sophie's father, all of this would need to be resolved. But looking at Sophie, who was now humming softly to her sleeping brothers, Claire felt a fierce determination grow within her. No matter what came their way, she would stand by these children. Somehow, someway, they would find a path through this. Christmas Day was coming to an end. Outside, the city lights twinkled against the dark sky like stars of hope. Inside the hospital, in a room filled with presents and good intentions, a new family was beginning to form, not by blood, but by choice, by courage, and by love. Claire looked at Anne, at Sophie, at the twins in their incubators. "We'll figure this out," she said, her voice firm with conviction, "together." And in that moment, despite all the challenges that still lay ahead, hope seemed stronger than ever. A hope born of adversity, nurtured by compassion, and strengthened by the determination to do what was right. The awakening of hope had begun. The day after Christmas dawned grey and cold, as if the very sky reflected the tension hanging over the hospital. Claire, who had barely slept, was checking on the twins when she heard a commotion in the hallway. Her heart leaped into her throat as she recognized the voice of Anne, the social worker, mixed with an agitated and unfamiliar male voice. "Where are my children? I have the right to see them." Claire rushed out into the hallway to find a chaotic scene. A disheveled-looking man was gesturing wildly, while Anne tried to calm him. 2 hospital security guards stood nearby, ready to intervene. "Mr. Thomas," Anne was saying, her voice firm but calm, "I understand your concern, but we need to discuss the situation before you can see the children." It was at this moment that Claire saw Sophie, frozen in fear at the door of her room. The girl's eyes were wide with terror, fixed on the figure of her father. Sophie," Claire called softly, moving to stand between the girl and Thomas. "It's okay, dear, you're safe." Thomas turned at the sound of Sophie's name, his bloodshot eyes meeting hers. For a moment, his expression softened, a mix of relief and shame passing over his face. "Sophie," he murmured, taking a step towards her. The movement was enough to break Sophie's trance. With a muffled cry, she turned and ran back into her room. Claire, without hesitation, followed her, closing the door behind her. Sophie was huddled in a corner, trembling violently. Claire approached slowly, kneeling next to the girl. "Sophie, look at me," she said gently. "You're safe here. Nothing is going to happen to you." Slowly, Sophie raised her eyes, tears streaming down her face. He's going to take the babies away," she sobbed. "He didn't even want them. He used to yell at Mom, saying it was her fault." Claire felt a surge of anger rise within her, but kept her voice calm. "No one is going to take your brothers, Sophie, I promise. Can you tell me more about what happened at home?" Between choked sobs, Sophie began to reveal more details about life with her alcoholic father, the nights of shouting, the days of neglect, the constant fear that permeated the house. Claire listened, her heart breaking for the pain this child had endured. Outside, the sound of Thomas's voice could still be heard, now lower and defeated. Claire knew she needed to face the man, confront him with the truth of his actions. "Sophie," she said softly, "I'm going to talk to your father now. Do you want Anne to stay with you?" Sophie nodded silently. Claire called Anne and, after ensuring Sophie was safe with the social worker, went out to face Thomas. She found him sitting in a chair in the hallway, his head in his hands. As he heard her steps, he looked up, his eyes red and swollen. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "My name is Claire. I'm the nurse who has been taking care of your children since they arrived here." Thomas stood up abruptly. "My children, how are they? The babies, They're fine," Claire interrupted, her voice firm. "Thanks to your 10-year-old daughter, who brought them here after caring for them alone for a week." Thomas's face contorted in a mix of shame and denial. I didn't know. I thought that Sarah's family—" "No one knew," Claire said, her voice now steely. "No one but Sophie, who had to deal with her mother's death and the care of 2 newborns completely alone." Thomas staggered, as if physically struck. I didn't. Sarah died and I couldn't." "Couldn't what?" Claire pressed. "Be a father. Take care of your children when they needed you most." Thomas crumpled, sobs shaking his body. "I failed," he cried. "Failed Sarah. Failed my children. I don't know how to fix this." Claire felt her anger dissipate, replaced by a mix of pity and caution. She knelt down beside Thomas, keeping a safe distance. "The first step is admitting your mistakes," she said softly. "The next is doing what's best for your children, even if that means taking a step back." Thomas looked up, his face a mask of pain and regret. "I want to do the right thing. I want I want to ask Sophie for forgiveness. Show her that I can change. Claire nodded slowly. That will take time, Thomas. And work. A lot of work. Meanwhile, inside the room, Anne was gently questioning Sophie about her fears and wishes. The social worker made notes, her face a mask of professional concentration, but her eyes betrayed the emotion she felt for the girl's situation. Sophie, Anne said finally, I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you and your brothers stay together and safe, but I need you to be brave one more time. Can we talk about what you want to happen now? Sophie looked at Anne, then at the closed door behind which she knew her father stood. She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. I want to stay with my brothers, she said, her voice small but firm. And I want Claire to stay with us. Anne smiled gently. We'll work on that, okay? One step at a time. Outside, Claire helped Thomas to his feet. I'll talk to Sophie, she said. If she agrees, you can see her. But on our terms, understood? Thomas nodded, wiping away his tears. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for taking care of them when I couldn't. As Claire walked back to Sophie's room, she was hit by a wave of memories from her own past. The pain of separation, the fear of the unknown, the hope of redemption. She saw herself reflected in Sophie, in Thomas, even in the tiny twins fighting for life. Claire took a deep breath, preparing herself to enter the room and face the next chapter of this complicated story. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. She would do everything in her power to protect these children and help them find the path to healing and love they deserved. With one last look at Thomas, who remained in the hallway looking lost and regretful, Claire opened the door to Sophie's room, ready to help the girl face her own past and, perhaps, begin to build a new future. Dr. Marcus's office was crowded. Claire, Anne, Thomas, and representatives from social services and the hospital huddled in the cramped space. The tension was palpable, each person aware of the weight of the decisions about to be made. Given the circumstances, began the representative from social services, his monotone voice contrasting with the gravity of the situation, we have no choice but to place Sophie and the twins under temporary state custody. Claire felt her heart sink. Although she had expected this, hearing the words out loud made it all too painfully real. For how long? She asked, her voice betraying her anxiety. Until we can determine a suitable permanent arrangement, he replied. It could take weeks, maybe months. It was at this moment that Claire made a decision that would change the course of her life. I volunteer to be the temporary guardian, she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. The silence that followed was deafening. Anne was the first to break it. Claire, she said softly, I know you care deeply for these children, but there are complications. Dr. Marcus cleared his throat, uncomfortable. Claire, your emotional attachment raises ethical questions. The hospital is investigating your involvement in this case. Claire felt a surge of indignation. Emotional attachment? Is that what we're calling compassion now? Thomas, who had remained silent until then, spoke unexpectedly. I support Mrs. Claire, he said, his voice hoarse. She has been more of a mother to my children in the past few days than I have been a father in years. All eyes turned to Thomas, surprised. He seemed smaller somehow, the initial arrogance replaced by genuine humility. And I know I failed, he continued. That's why I'm going to check myself into a rehab program. I want to be the father my children deserve, but I know I can't do it alone. Claire looked at Thomas as seeing him in a new light. The man she had despised was showing a courage she hadn't expected. Anne, always the voice of reason, intervened. Although I appreciate Claire's offer and Thomas's support, there are legitimate concerns. Claire, your age and emotional involvement are serious issues. Claire felt the weight of her 62 years like never before. My age, she repeated, incredulous. I'm in perfect health and have decades of experience caring for children. It's not just that, Anne continued gently. There's also the matter of your past. Your own experience of giving a child up for adoption may be influencing your decisions now. Anne's words hit Claire like a punch to the gut. She had shared this part of her past with Anne in confidence years ago, Hearing it used against her now hurt deeply. "My past makes me more qualified, not less," Claire argued, fighting to maintain her composure. "I understand what these children are going through in a way few others can." The representative from social services cleared his throat. "Regardless of Claire's qualifications, protocol requires us to explore all options, including relatives and trained foster families." Claire felt panic rising within her. The idea of Sophie and the twins being separated, sent to strange homes, was unbearable. "And what about what Sophie wants?" she asked, desperate. "She has expressed her wish to stay with me." "Sophie's wishes will be considered," Anne assured, "but they cannot be the only factor in our decision." As the discussion continued, Claire found herself questioning her own motivations. Was she really acting in the best interest of the children, or was she projecting her own regrets and unfulfilled desires onto Sophie? The doubt gnawed at her, mingling with her determination. Hours passed. Anne worked tirelessly, presenting options, negotiating compromises. Thomas provided information about distant relatives, although none seemed like viable options. The hospital pressed for a quick resolution, concerned about the ethical and legal implications of Claire's continued involvement. Finally, exhausted and emotionally drained, they reached a temporary agreement. Sophie and the twins would be placed in a specialized foster home experienced in complex cases, but Claire would have permission for frequent visits. Thomas would begin his rehab program immediately, with supervised visits once he was considered stable enough. When the meeting ended, Claire felt simultaneously relieved and devastated. She had avoided the worst-case scenario, but she still felt like she was losing something precious. Anne found her in the hallway, her eyes filled with sympathy. "I know this isn't what you wanted, Claire," she said softly, "but it's the best we can do for now. I'll continue working on the case, looking for a permanent solution that keeps the children together." Claire nodded, unable to speak through the lump in her throat. "And Claire," Anne continued, placing a comforting hand on her friend's shoulder, maybe it's time for you to face your own past. This could help not only you but also Sophie and the twins in the long run." Anne's words echoed in Claire's mind as she walked back to Sophie's room. How would she explain this to the girl? How could she make Sophie understand that sometimes doing the right thing meant making painful decisions? Pausing outside the door, Claire took a deep breath, gathering her courage. She knew the coming days, weeks, and perhaps months would be an emotional roller coaster. There would be tears, anger, fear, and hopefully, moments of joy and progress. But one thing was certain. Claire would not give up. She would face her own past, fight the system if necessary, and do everything in her power to ensure that Sophie, the twins, and even Thomas had the chance for healing and happiness they deserved. With a final determined sigh, Claire opened the door, ready to face the next challenge in this unexpected journey that had become her life's mission. The weeks unfolded like pages of a book, each day bringing new challenges and small victories. Claire, against all odds, had managed to obtain special authorization to care for Sophie and the twins in her own home, under constant supervision from social services. The routine that settled in was exhausting, but rewarding. Claire woke before dawn to prepare the twins' bottles, now named Emily and Ethan. Sophie, always eager to help, insisted on waking up at the same time, her eyes sleepy but determined. "You need to sleep more, dear," Claire would say softly, but Sophie would just shake her head. "I want to help. They're my family," she would reply, her voice a mix of pride and fear, as if afraid that at any moment it could all be taken away from her. The days were filled with medical appointments for the twins, therapy sessions for Sophie, and an endless stream of visits from social workers and lawyers. But amid the stress and bureaucracy, there were moments of pure joy. Emily's first genuine smile, the way Ethan would instantly calm at the sound of Sophie's voice, the laughter that filled the house during family game nights. One evening, as Claire tucked the twins into their cribs, Sophie approached her with a thoughtful expression. "Claire," she began cautiously, "do you think Mum would be happy with this?" "With us?" Claire felt her heart swell with love and a pang of sadness. "Oh dear," she said softly, "I'm sure your mum is looking down on us now, smiling. She always wanted the best for you, and now you have even more people to love and care for you." Sophie smiled, tears shining in her eyes. "I like that," she whispered. Having a big family. As the date of the final custody hearing approached, the uncertainty that constantly hung over them became painfully clear. Claire knew her situation was precarious, a temporary arrangement that could be undone at any moment. This reality became starkly evident when Claire was summoned to a disciplinary hearing at the hospital. Sitting before a panel of administrators and colleagues, she felt strangely calm. "Nurse Claire," began the hospital director, his voice grave, "you are aware that your involvement in this case has crossed several ethical and professional lines." Claire nodded but kept her head held high. "I am aware that my actions were unconventional," she replied, "but I am also certain that they were necessary and correct." For nearly 2 hours, Claire defended her decisions, detailing each step she had taken and why. She spoke of the twins' fragile condition when they arrived, of Sophie's trauma, of the urgent need for stability and love. "If I could go back," she concluded, looking each member of the panel in the eye, "I would do exactly the same thing. Because being a nurse is not just about following protocols, it's about truly caring." There was a tense moment of silence before the director spoke again. "Your dedication is admirable, Nurse Claire, but it is also problematic. We will need time to deliberate on your future at this institution." Meanwhile, miles away, Thomas was facing his own battles. The rehab program was brutal, forcing him to confront years of addiction and destructive behavior. But the image of his children pushed him forward. After a month of intensive treatment, Thomas made a request that surprised even his therapists. He wanted to see his children. The news hit Claire like a bolt from the blue. Part of her wanted to protect Sophie and the twins, keep them away from the man who had abandoned them. But another part recognized the importance of family, the possibility of healing and reconciliation. "Sophie," Claire said gently one evening, as they tucked the twins into their cribs, "your dad has asked to see you." Sophie froze, her eyes widening with a mix of fear and hope. He wants to see us." Claire nodded. "The decision is yours, dear. If you're not ready, you don't have to." "I want to," Sophie interrupted, her voice trembling slightly. "But you'll be there with me, won't you, Claire?" Claire's heart ached at the implicit trust in that question. "Of course I will. I'll be by your side the whole time." The first supervised visit was tense. Thomas, looking thinner and more sober than Claire remembered, entered the visiting room with hesitant steps. Sophie clung to Claire's hand, her eyes studying her father as if searching for something. "Hi, Princess," Thomas said softly, tears shining in his eyes. "Hi, little ones." Sophie didn't respond immediately, her eyes filled with a mix of caution and hope. Finally, she whispered a barely audible, "Hi, Dad." The next hour was a careful dance. Thomas, clearly nervous, tried to initiate conversations, make jokes for the babies, connect in some way. Sophie, for her part, alternated between moments of cautious openness and defensive retreat. As the visit came to an end and Thomas said his goodbyes, Sophie surprised everyone by giving her father a quick hug. "You'll come back?" she asked, her voice a mix of hope and fear. Thomas looked at Claire, then back at Sophie. "If you want me to, Princess, I'm trying to be better for you." In the days that followed, Sophie repeatedly expressed her desire to stay with Claire. "You're my family now," she would say, her eyes filled with a certainty that broke Claire's heart. "Oh dear," Claire would reply, pulling the girl into a tight embrace. "You'll always have a place in my heart, but your dad is trying. Shouldn't we give him a chance?" It was a constant struggle for Claire, balancing her protective instinct with the possibility of family reunification. She saw the progress Thomas was making, heard the positive reports from his therapists, but she also saw the fear in Sophie's eyes, the hesitation that still lingered. The visits continued, some better than others. There were days of laughter and connection, and days of silent tension and held-back tears. But slowly, inexorably, bonds began to form. Or perhaps Claire thought, to reform. One evening, as Claire watched Sophie and the twins sleep, she allowed herself a moment of reflection, looking at the photos that now adorned her living room, Sophie smiling, the twins growing before her eyes, even a recent picture of Thomas holding the babies. She felt a bittersweet mix of joy and apprehension. These bonds that were forming were beautiful and precious. But Claire knew, deep in her heart, that they were also fragile. The future was still uncertain, filled with possibilities both wonderful and frightening. But for now, in this quiet evening, Claire allowed herself to feel hope. Hope that, no matter what the future held, the bonds formed in these difficult days would be strong enough to withstand any storm that came their way. Claire knew there were missing pieces in Sophie's story. Driven by a curiosity that bordered on obsession, she decided to delve deeper into the family's past. With Thomas's reluctant permission and Anne's support, Claire began her investigation. Her first discoveries came through public records and old newspaper clippings. The name of Sophie's mother, Sarah Thompson, appeared in an article about promising young members of the community. Sarah Thompson, 18, receives full scholarship to study nursing, the headline read. Claire felt a chill run down her spine. Nursing, just like her. Digging deeper, Claire discovered that Sarah had graduated with honors, working at a children's hospital for a few years before her marriage to Thomas. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but there was still much to uncover. On a rainy afternoon, while Sophie played with the twins under Anne's supervision, Claire found herself in a discreet cafe near Thomas's rehab clinic. "Thank you for agreeing to talk," Claire said, observing the man across from her. Thomas looked healthier, his eyes clearer, but he still carried a visible weight on his shoulders. I think I owe it to you." "To all of you," Thomas replied, his voice low. "What do you want to know?" "Everything," Claire said simply. "About you, about Sarah, how you met. What happened?" Thomas took a deep breath, his eyes lost in distant memories. She was pure light," he began. "We met when she was doing her internship at the hospital. I was a patient, recovering from a car accident." Claire listened attentively as Thomas unfolded the story of their relationship, the quick and intense love, the hurried marriage, the happy early years, and then the shadows began to appear in his account. "And I always had problems with drinking," Thomas admitted, shame clear in his voice. "Sarah thought she could fix me. She gave up so much for me, her career, her dreams." The guilt in his voice was palpable. Claire felt a mix of compassion and frustration. "And when Sophie was born, it was like the sun had risen in our house," Thomas said, a sad smile playing on his lips. "For a while I thought everything would be okay, but then I went back to drinking. Sarah was devastated. She threatened to leave me several times, but she always ended up staying." Claire absorbed each word, her heart heavy with the tragedy unfolding. "And the last pregnancy." Thomas's face contorted in pain. "I didn't want more children. I didn't trust myself. But Sarah, she was so happy. She said it was our chance to start over. I was a coward. I ran to the bottle instead of facing my fears." As Thomas continued his confession, in Claire's house, Sophie made a discovery of her own. Rummaging through a box of belongings Thomas had brought from the old apartment, she found a diary with a worn cover. With trembling hands, Sophie opened the diary, immediately recognizing her mother's handwriting. The first pages were happy, full of hope and love, but as she read on, the tone changed. "Dear diary," Sophie read aloud softly, "sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice. I love Thomas, but the alcohol is destroying our family. Sophie deserves more. Maybe we should have stayed with my adoptive mother. She always said she would take us back." Sophie froze. Adoptive mother? Her mother had been adopted. That would explain why she never knew her maternal grandparents. Back at the cafe, Claire felt the world spinning around her. With trembling hands, she opened the file. There it was, in black and white, her signature, the date, the details of the baby. It was real. Sarah was really her daughter. "Oh my God," Claire whispered, her voice barely above a whisper. Anne sighed deeply. "This complicates things, Claire. On one hand, this establishes a biological connection between you and the children, which could strengthen your case for custody. On the other hand, Claire completed, it could look like I have a conflict of interest. That I'm doing this for selfish reasons." Anne nodded gravely. "Exactly. We have to be very careful about how we present this in court. Meanwhile, the community had been touched by Sophie's story. A benefit event was being organized in the city park. Colorful banners announced a day of games, food and music, all in support of the children. Claire arrived home to find Sophie sitting on the porch, the diary in her lap, silent tears streaming down her face. "Sophie, what's wrong, dear?" The girl looked up, a mix of confusion and hope in her gaze. "Claire, do you know my grandmother? My mom's adoptive mother." The world spun again for Claire. How could she explain this? How could she tell this child, who had already lost so much, that they were actually family by blood? At that moment, with the distant sound of laughter and music from the park, where the community gathered to support them, with the weight of the day's revelations pressing on her shoulders, Claire made a decision. She sat down next to Sophie, pulled the girl close and began, "Sophie, dear, I have a story to tell you. A story about family, about second chances, and about how, sometimes, fate has mysterious ways of bringing us together." The words flowed, and with them a new reality began to take shape. A reality where the past, present and future intertwined in ways no one could have predicted. Dawn found Claire sitting at her kitchen table, a cup of coffee growing cold before her. Her eyes were fixed on a dusty box she had unearthed from the back of her closet, a box containing the few tangible remnants of a painful chapter in her life. With trembling hands, she opened the box, revealing its contents: a lock of blonde hair tied with a faded ribbon, a tiny hospital bracelet, and a single black and white photo of a newborn baby. On the back of the photo, in Claire's careful teenage handwriting, was written, "My little Sarah, May 12, 1978. The sound of soft footsteps pulled her from her thoughts. Sophie entered the kitchen, her eyes sleepy but curious. "What's this, Claire?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder. Claire hesitated for a moment before replying, "They're memories, dear, of someone very special I lost a long time ago." Sophie moved closer, her eyes fixed on the photo of the baby. "She looks a bit like me," she murmured, almost to herself. Claire's heart leaped. "Yes," she replied softly, "she really does." That morning, after leaving Sophie at school and the twins with the babysitter, Claire headed to Anne's office. Her friend and social worker received her with a look of concern. "Claire, you look like you haven't slept at all. What's going on?" Claire took a deep breath before speaking. "Anne, I need your help. I need to find my daughter." Anne listened attentively as Claire explained her suspicions, the unlikely connection she believed existed between her past and Sophie. "Claire," Anne said gently when she finished, "I know how much this means to you, but you have to be prepared. Even if Sarah was really your daughter, she hesitated, not wanting to say the words. "I know," Claire replied, her voice breaking. "She's gone. But Sophie might be my granddaughter. I need to be sure." Anne nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "I'll make some calls, see what I can find out. But Claire, please be cautious. This could affect the custody case." Meanwhile, elsewhere in the city, Thomas was facing his own journey of discovery. Sitting in a group therapy session, he shared his recent progress. "Yesterday," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "I read a story to the twins for the first time. Sophie was there, helping me with the different voices for each character. It was the happiest moment I've had in years." The therapist smiled encouragingly. "That's wonderful, Thomas. How did you feel at that moment?" Thomas paused, reflecting. "Scared," he admitted. "Happy, but scared. And if I mess it all up again? What if I don't deserve this second chance?" Back at Claire's house, Sophie was sifting through old family photo albums that Thomas had brought. Each photo, each handwritten note by her mother, was a treasure. But with each discovery, more questions arose. "Hi, Claire," she called when the nurse returned from work. "Did you know my mom was adopted?" Claire felt her heart race. I heard something about that, yes. Why?" Sophie frowned thoughtfully. "It's weird. Mum never talked much about it. But I found some old letters. It seems like she was looking for her biological mother just before I was born." Claire fought to maintain her composure. "And did she find anything?" Sophie shook her head. I don't know. The letters just stop, but... She hesitated, biting her lip. Sometimes when Mom looked at me, she said I reminded her of someone. Someone she couldn't quite remember. Sophie's words echoed in Claire's mind, reinforcing her suspicions. She wanted desperately to share her discoveries with the girl, but she knew she needed to be certain first. The following days were a blur of frantic activity. Anne dug through old adoption records, making calls to contacts in social services. Claire divided her time between work, caring for the children, and her own private investigation. Thomas, meanwhile, continued his steady progress. His visits to the children became more frequent and relaxed. Sophie, though still cautious, began to lower her guard around her father. A week before the custody hearing, Anne called Claire for an urgent meeting. I found something, she said, her voice a mix of excitement and apprehension. She slid a folder across the table. Adoption records from 1978. A girl, born on May 12th, given up by... She paused, looking directly at Claire. By you. Claire felt the world spinning around her. With trembling hands, she opened the folder. There it was, in black and white. Her signature, the date, the details of the baby. It was real. Sarah was really her daughter. Oh my God, Claire whispered, her voice barely above a whisper. Anne sighed deeply. This complicates things, Claire. On one hand, this establishes a biological connection between you and the children, which could strengthen your case for custody. On the other hand, Claire completed, it could look like I have a conflict of interest, that I'm doing this for selfish reasons. Anne nodded gravely. Exactly. We have to be very careful about how we present this in court. As Claire left Anne's office, she felt the weight of decades of secrets and regrets on her shoulders. She knew the coming weeks would be crucial. The custody hearing was not just about the future of Sophie and the twins anymore. It was about reconciling the past with the present, about second chances and redemption. Arriving home, she found Sophie and Thomas in the living room, laughing together as they played with the twins. The scene, so domestic and full of love, made Claire's heart ache. She knew she had an impossible decision ahead of her: reveal the truth and potentially disrupt the fragile peace they had built, or keep the secret and carry this burden alone. As she watched her newly discovered family, Claire made a silent promise. No matter what happened, she would do what was best for the children, even if it meant sacrificing her own happiness once again. With the date of the court judgment fast approaching, the air was thick with expectation and fear. The past and present were about to collide spectacularly, and no one could predict the consequences. The courtroom was packed that Monday morning. The air was heavy with expectation and tension. Claire, sitting rigidly beside her lawyer, couldn't stop casting anxious glances at Sophie, who sat a few rows back with Anne. Thomas, on the other side of the room, looked pale and nervous but determined. Judge Harriman, a middle-aged man with piercing eyes, entered the room, silencing the murmurs. "We are here today," he began, his grave voice echoing through the room, "to determine the future of Sophie Thompson and her twin siblings, Emily and Ethan Thompson. This is a unique case with extraordinary circumstances. We will hear all sides before making a decision." Claire's lawyer was the first to present his case. He spoke eloquently about the bond Claire had formed with the children, her experience as a nurse, and her unwavering dedication to their well-being. When it was Claire's turn to testify, she stood with trembling legs but a firm voice. "Your Honor," she began, "I know my involvement in this case has been unconventional, but from the moment Sophie entered that hospital carrying her brothers, I knew these children needed more than just medical care. They needed love, stability, and a home." Claire continued, her voice filling with emotion. "I've seen Sophie blossom from a terrified, traumatized little girl into a brave, loving young woman. I've seen the twins thrive and grow. I'm not here just as a caregiver, but as someone who loves these children as if they were my own." The courtroom fell silent for a moment after Claire's impassioned testimony. Judge Harriman made some notes before calling Thomas to the stand. Thomas stood, visibly nervous but with a determination clear in his eyes. "I know I've made terrible mistakes," he began, his voice hoarse with emotion. I failed my children in ways I can never fully make up for. But in the past months, I've worked hard to become the father they deserve. He presented certificates of completion from his rehab program, letters of recommendation from his therapists, and even a journal detailing his progress and reflections. I'm not asking you to forget my mistakes, Thomas continued, and I'm asking for a chance to prove that I can be the father my children need and deserve. Judge Harriman listened attentively, asking occasional questions to both Claire and Thomas. As the hearing progressed, it became clear that the decision would not be easy. It was then that Claire's lawyer raised an unexpected issue. "Your Honor," he said, "given the extraordinary nature of this case and Claire's claims of a special bond, we request that DNA tests be conducted to confirm paternity and clarify any biological relationships." The request caused a stir in the room. Claire felt her heart race. She knew this moment might come, but she still wasn't prepared. Judge Harriman considered the request for a moment before nodding. "Given the unique nature of this case, I find it prudent to proceed with the DNA tests. We will adjourn for an hour while the tests are conducted." The next hour was a blur of frantic activity. Samples were collected. Tests were run with top priority. Claire, Thomas, Sophie, and the twins were all tested. When they reconvened in the courtroom, the tension was palpable. Judge Harriman held a sealed envelope containing the results. "Before I reveal these results," he said gravely, "I want to remind everyone that, regardless of what these papers say, the well-being of the children must remain our utmost priority." With that, he opened the envelope and began to read. His face, normally impassive, showed signs of surprise. "Well," he said finally, "it seems we have a rather extraordinary situation on our hands." The silence in the room was deafening as everyone waited with bated breath. "The tests confirm that Thomas Thompson is indeed the biological father of Sophie, Emily, and Ethan," the judge began. There was a collective sigh of relief from Thomas, but the judge was not finished. However, the tests also revealed something unexpected. "According to these results, Claire Anderson is—" He paused as if he could hardly believe what he was about to say. "The biological grandmother of Sophie and, consequently, the great-grandmother of Emily and Ethan." The courtroom erupted in commotion. Voices of surprise and confusion overlapped. Claire felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. She looked at Sophie, who stared at her with wide, shocked eyes. Thomas seemed completely stunned. How is this possible?" he managed to stammer. Judge Harriman banged his gavel, calling for order. "Silence in the court," he commanded. When the commotion subsided, he continued. "According to these results, it appears that the late Sarah Thompson, mother of Sophie and wife of Thomas, was in fact the biological daughter of Claire Anderson, given up for adoption many years ago." Claire felt hot tears streaming down her face. Decades of pain, regret, and longing came rushing to the surface all at once. She looked at Sophie, her granddaughter, seeing in her now not just echoes of Sarah, but of herself. Sophie stood slowly, her voice trembling as she spoke. "So, you're my real grandmother?" Claire nodded, unable to speak through the lump in her throat. Judge Harriman, sensing the emotional intensity of the moment, banged his gavel again. "Silence in the court," he ordered. When the room quieted, he continued, "Given these revelations, I will adjourn this session. Everyone needs time to process this information and consider its implications for the case at hand. We will reconvene tomorrow at 10 a.m. As people began to move, still in a state of shock, Claire remained immobile in her seat. Her past and present had collided in a way she never could have imagined. The daughter she had given up for adoption so many years ago had not only come back into her life through Sophie, but she now had a whole family she never knew existed. Thomas approached her hesitantly, Sophie by his side. I think we have a lot to talk about," he said softly. Claire looked at them, her newly discovered family, and nodded. "Yes," she replied, her voice choked with emotion, "we certainly do." As they left the courtroom together, Claire knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The future, which had once seemed so uncertain, now opened with possibilities she had never dared to dream. The truth had been revealed, and with it came the chance for healing, redemption, and perhaps a new definition of family. The sun had barely risen when Claire found herself sitting on her porch, a cup of tea growing cold between her trembling hands. The revelations of the courtroom still echoed in her mind, challenging everything she believed she knew about her life. "Grandmother," she murmured to herself, testing the word. It felt both strange and incredibly right. The soft sound of footsteps pulled her from her thoughts. Sophie appeared at the door, her eyes still sleepy but filled with a mix of confusion and hope. "Good morning," the girl said softly. Can I sit with you?" Claire felt her heart ache. "Of course, dear. Always." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the sunrise. It was Sophie who finally broke the silence. "So, you really are my grandmother?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Claire nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "Yes, Sophie. I gave your mother up for adoption when I was very young. I never imagined—" Her voice faltered. Sophie looked at Claire, her eyes filled with a mix of wonder and hope. "Mom used to say I reminded her of someone she couldn't quite remember. I think she was talking about you." Sophie's words were like a balm to Claire's broken heart. They spent the next hours talking, sharing stories about Sarah, filling in the gaps of their lives apart. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the city, Thomas faced his own demons. Sitting in his small apartment, he stared at a photo of Sarah. "Did you know?" he asked the silent image. "Did you know and never tell me?" The fear of losing his parental rights consumed him. Claire was now not just a dedicated caregiver, but the biological grandmother of his children. How could he compete with that? It was at this moment of despair that his phone rang. It was Anne, the social worker. "Thomas," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "I know this is a lot to process, but we need to talk about the next steps." Meanwhile, Anne dove headfirst into the adoption records, determined to unravel the whole story. She spent hours on the phone, tracing information, connecting dots that had been obscured for decades. Back at Claire's house, Sophie played with the twins in the backyard, watched closely by her newly discovered grandmother. Claire couldn't take her eyes off them, seeing now not just the children she had learned to love, but a part of herself, a legacy she thought she had lost forever. "They have your eyes," a voice said behind her. Claire turned to see Thomas standing at the back door, a tentative smile on his face. "Thomas," Claire said, surprised. "I didn't expect—" He shrugged, moving to stand beside her. "Neither did I, to be honest. But after thinking a lot, I realized this might be a good thing. For all of us." Claire looked at him, confused. "You're not afraid of losing your rights?" Thomas sighed deeply. "I'm terrified," he admitted, "but I see how Sophie looks at you. I see the love you have for them. And I think maybe this is what they need. A bigger family, more love." Thomas's words touched Claire deeply. She reached out, touching his arm gently. "Thank you," she said simply. The following days were a mix of emotions and adjustments. Claire and Sophie spent hours together, sharing photo albums, cooking family recipes, building the grandparent-grandchild bond that had been denied to them for so long. Thomas, surprisingly, became a staunch advocate of this new family dynamic. He participated actively, bringing the twins for visits, sharing stories about Sarah with Claire, allowing them all to heal together. One afternoon, as Claire rocked Ethan to sleep, Sophie approached her with a thoughtful expression. Grandma," she began, testing the new word. "Do you think Mum would be happy with this? With us?" Claire felt her heart fill with love and a pang of sadness. "Oh dear," she said softly. "I'm sure your mum is looking down on us now," smiling. "She always wanted the best for you. And now you have even more people to love and care for you," Sophie smiled, tears shining in her eyes. "I like that," she whispered, "having a big family." As the date of the final decision approached, the preparations were in full swing. Anne had compiled a comprehensive dossier on the history of Sarah's adoption, including the circumstances that led Claire to make that difficult decision so many years ago. Claire, Thomas, and their respective lawyers worked together to develop a shared custody plan that put the children's well-being first. They proposed a unique approach. Thomas would retain primary custody, with Claire playing an active role as grandmother and supportive maternal figure. On the eve of the final hearing, the entire improvised family gathered at Claire's house for a dinner. The table was full not just of food, but of laughter, stories, and a palpable sense of hope. Looking around the table, Claire felt a surge of gratitude so strong it almost overwhelmed her. There was Sophie, helping the twins play with their new toys, Thomas conversing animatedly with the neighbors, Anne laughing at a joke, all of them part of this extraordinary journey. "Before we begin," Claire said, standing with tears in her eyes, "I just want to say thank you to all of you. For months I thought I was caring for these children, but the truth is all of you, this community, this family we've formed, you've been caring for me too." There was a murmur of emotional agreement around the table. Thomas raised his glass in a toast. "To family," he said. "Not the one we're born into, but the one we choose and build along the way." "To family," everyone echoed. As the night wore on and the conversations flowed, Claire allowed herself, for the first time in a long time, to feel genuine hope for the future. Tomorrow, the judge would make his decision. But looking at the people gathered in her living room, Claire knew that no matter the legal outcome, they had already formed something precious and unbreakable. The bonds that had been broken so many years ago were being rebuilt, richer and stronger than she ever could have imagined. And at the center of it all was Sophie, the missing link who had brought healing and redemption to them all. The courtroom was packed the morning of the final decision. The murmur of anxious voices quieted as Judge Harriman entered, his face serious, but not devoid of compassion. "After careful consideration of the facts presented," he began, "including the recent revelations about the biological connections, I am ready to announce my decision." Claire held her breath, feeling Sophie's hand tighten in hers. Thomas, on the other side of the girl, looked equally tense. "This case has presented us with extraordinary circumstances that require an equally unique solution," the judge continued. "Therefore, I propose the following arrangement." The silence was absolute as everyone awaited his words. "Mr. Thomas Thompson will retain primary custody of Sophie, Emily, and Ethan," the judge announced. There was an audible sigh of relief from Thomas. "However," he continued, "this custody is conditional upon the continuation of his treatment and maintenance of his sobriety." The judge then turned to Claire. "Miss Claire Anderson, you are officially recognized as the biological grandmother of Sophie and the great-grandmother of Emily and Ethan. As such, you will receive extensive visitation rights and will be an integral part of the children's lives." Claire felt tears of joy streaming down her face. She looked at Sophie, who was smiling radiantly. "Additionally," the judge continued, "both parties will participate in regular family counseling to ensure a smooth transition and the continued well-being of the children." When the judge finished detailing the terms of the agreement, he looked directly at Sophie. "Young lady, do you have anything to say?" Sophie stood, her voice trembling slightly but filled with determination. "Yes, Your Honor. I just want to say thank you for giving me the chance to have both my grandmother and my dad in my life. It's more than I ever dreamed of having." There wasn't a dry eye in the room when Sophie finished speaking. Judge Harriman, visibly moved, banged his gavel. "So it shall be. May this family find the healing and happiness they so deserve." In the days that followed, a series of changes occurred rapidly. Claire, after much reflection, decided to retire from the hospital. "It's time to dedicate myself to the family I thought I had lost forever," she explained to her emotional colleagues at her farewell party. Thomas, with Claire and Sophie's support, moved into a larger house closer to Claire's, facilitating the frequent visits and co-parenting. He continued his treatment with renewed dedication, determined to be the father his children deserved. The months passed, filled with memorable firsts. The first Mother's Day. Claire celebrated as a grandmother. The twins' first birthday celebrated together by the whole family. The first time Sophie called Claire Grandma, without hesitation. And then, almost without noticing, Christmas Eve arrived again. A year had passed since that fateful night when Sophie entered the hospital carrying her newborn siblings. Claire's house was festively decorated, the aroma of roasting turkey and freshly baked cookies permeating the air. In the center of the living room stood an imposing Christmas tree, surrounded by carefully wrapped presents. The doorbell rang, and Claire opened the door to reveal Thomas, carrying Emily, while Sophie held Ethan's hand as he took tentative steps. "Merry Christmas!" they exclaimed in unison. Claire embraced each of them, her heart overflowing with love. "Come in, come in." It's cold out there. Inside, the house was filled with life and laughter. Anne was there, along with some neighbours who had become an integral part of their extended family. The twins, now a year old, were the centre of attention, their toothless grins and contagious laughter filling the room with joy. Sophie ran to the tree, her eyes shining with excitement. "Can we open the presents now, please?" she begged. Claire and Thomas exchanged amused glances. "I think we can open one each before dinner," Claire conceded with a smile. As the children eagerly tore open the wrapping paper, Claire found herself reflecting on the incredible year that had passed. The tragedy that had initially brought them together had transformed into something beautiful and precious. Thomas approached her, offering a glass of wine. "A penny for your thoughts," he said softly. Claire smiled, accepting the drink. "Just thinking about how life can surprise us. A year ago, I was alone in this hospital, with no idea that my life was about to change completely." Thomas nodded, his gaze turning to Sophie, who was helping the twins open their presents. "I know what you mean. I was at rock bottom, thinking I had lost everything. And now I have more than I ever dreamed I deserved." At that moment, Sophie looked up at them, her face radiant with happiness. She stood up and ran to embrace them both, pulling Claire and Thomas into a tight hug. "Thank you," she whispered, "for being the best family I could ever ask for." Claire felt the tears streaming down her face, but this time they were tears of pure joy. She looked around the room, at the smiling faces of her newly formed family, at the twins growing up healthy and happy, at Thomas D., who had found the strength to change his life. "You know," she said, her voice choked with emotion, "they say Christmas is the time for miracles, and looking at all of you, I can't help but think we've witnessed a true Christmas miracle." Thomas raised his glass. "To second chances," he proposed. "To love," Sophie added softly. "To family," Claire completed. Everyone in the room raised their glasses, some with tears in their eyes, others with radiant smiles. "To family," they echoed in unison. As the night wore on, filled with laughter, shared stories, and the simple joy of being together, Claire felt truly at home for the first time in decades. The tragedy that had brought them together a year ago had transformed into a blessing beyond her wildest dreams. Looking at her family gathered around her, Claire knew with a certainty that came from the depths of her soul that this was just the beginning of a new and wonderful journey. Christmas, she realized, wasn't just about presents or decorations. It was about forgiveness, redemption, and the transformative power of love. It was about family, not just the one we're born into, but the one we choose and build along the way. And as the clock approached midnight, marking the beginning of a new Christmas, Claire made a silent prayer of gratitude for Sophie, who had brought light into her life, for the twins, who were a promise of the future, for Thomas, who had found the strength to change, and for all the small miracles that had transformed a night of despair into a year of hope and love. The future, she knew, would bring its own challenges. But looking at her family gathered around her, Claire had no doubt that together they could face anything. This was truly a new beginning, not just for her but for all of them. And so, surrounded by the warmth of familial love and the spirit of Christmas, Claire embraced her new role as a grandmother, friend, and pillar of a family born from adversity, but blossoming with love. The Christmas miracle, she realized, was not something that happened to you, but something you created, with love, forgiveness, and the courage to embrace new possibilities.